Okay, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ian Percy here today, who's a Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Ian will be speaking on the topic of composing soundworlds and timescapes, inflections of spirituality. So it's a great opener to our lunchtime lecture series this semester. So after an initial career in songwriting, sound engineering and studio production, Ian embarked on a long period of music education. He completed 4 years in college before moving on to university to focus upon analysis, composition and theory. An AHRC scholarship allowed him to continue this into postgraduate study, and Ian went on to complete his doctorate with Professor John Caskin at the University of Manchester. Ian spent 18 years as senior lecturer in music at Liverpool Hope University. His research focuses upon the practice, context and analysis of acoustic, acousmatic and electroacoustic composition. Recent performances include Ensemble 10 out of 10, the Smith Quartet Ensemble of St. Luke's, Nicholas Cox, Chileli, Hugo, Ian Buckle, Richard Casey and the Pixels. In his alter ego as a studio producer, Ian is regularly involved with collaborative research and archival recording projects, producing albums for CD release and online publication with artists such as Glee Archie, Del Tubrino, String Orchestra, Rupa Panaser, Alberto Sana and Trio Zambra, plus 3 albums in association with Millip Fest Indian Arts. Alongside decades of eclectic professional and academic experience, Ian remains a dedicated and enthusiastic composer, musician and musicologist, nurturing a lifelong passion for all things music. So I'll hand it over to there, Ian. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Hi everyone. It is often used by artists and academics of all disciplines how music is the purest form of art, that which is closest to working with nature and therefore that which is closest to God. Music is the purest form of art and therefore the most direct expression of beauty, with a form and spirit which is one and simple and least encumbered with anything extraneous. We seem to feel that the manifestation of the infinite in the finite forms of creation is music itself. Therefore, the true poets, they who are seers, seek to express the universe in terms of music. Though music has to wait for its completeness like any other art, as every step it gives out the beauty of the whole. As the material of expression, even words are barriers, for their meaning has to be construed or thought. But music never has to depend upon any obvious meaning. It expresses what no words can reveal. There is a perfection in each individual strain of this music, which is the revelation of completion in the incomplete. No one of its notes is final, yet each reflects the infinite. One can see many analogies with the interpretation of spirituality and religion within Tagore's description of music. He seems to place divine importance on the very existence of the art form. Through reflection upon historical landmarks informed by a personal contemporary practitioner's perspective, this lecture offers a brief exploration of the relationship between Western art, music and spirituality to see if there is any substance to the premise that music is the purest form of art, and does the 21st century share this view. Music is an incorporeal, invisible phenomenon. That has the power to imprint and evoke deep memories and emotions for the listener. The composer establishes temporal shape, form and character, and we have developed a complex vocabulary through which to discuss the music in the context of a pseudo-physical form, therefore rendering the incorporeal corporeal. We invent, reinterpret and reinvent according to the tastes and styles of passing time. But essentially, we're still dealing with the same musical resources, an ancient acoustic phenomenon, a natural and eternal continuum. Sound and vibration. Music, at its most fundamental definition, is the combination of and interactions between the multiple variables. Music is patterns of vibrations passing through panoptic space. Vibrations are a form of subliminal micro-rhythm with an inherent pulse, referred to as frequency. Rhythm is omnipotent within nature. The rhythm of the seasons and tides to the circadian rhythms of all living organisms. Our moods and thoughts affect the rhythms of our bodies. This is science. Many spiritual and natural healing practices aim to mediate, assuage, or tune the vibrations of the body through a combination of physiological and psychological exercises. In the West, the ear is given away to the eye as the most important gatherer of environmental information. One of the most evident testaments of this exchange is the way in which we've come to imagine God. It was not until the Renaissance that God became portraiture. Previously, he had been conceived as sound or vibration. In the Middle East, the message of Muhammad is still heard through the recitation of his Quran. Sama is the Sufi word for audition or listening. The followers of Jalal al-Din Rumi work themselves into the Sama state by whirling in mystical dances. The dancing is thought by some scholars to have represented the solar system, recalling also the deep-rooted mystical belief in the music of the spheres, which the attuned soul could sometimes hear. In the Zoroastrian religion, the priest Shrosh, representing the genius of hearing, stands between man and the pantheon of gods, transmitting the divine messages to humanity. And in support of that statement, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. God was considered sound. It is evident from Paleolithic and Neolithic cave art that dance, ritual, and ceremony have always been an important part of the human experience. When one sees images of dancing, it is not a huge leap of faith to presume there would be some form of accompanying rhythm. Voices, percussion instruments, and flutes, conch shells, reed pipes, etc., have been around for millennia. We also have evidence of music in the earliest cultures of Mesopotamia, Greece, Egypt, and Rome. The research strongly suggests that music, ritual, and spirituality have always shared a symbiotic relationship. Across time and geography, people have known the power of music for evoking the gods and acquiring spiritual insight. Whether arising as a textless chant by a single voice or a percussive auditory context for ritual dance, music in its various modes is a virtually ubiquitous companion to religious and spiritual practices. The apparently intangible, insubstantial nature of sound is one of the reasons why music has so effectively symbolized the mysterious and wholly other since the dawn of creation. In ancient Greece, music was taught as an art science within the art of pure reason, as opposed to the art of the trivium. And when Pythagoras conceived his music of the spheres, he genuinely believed he had unlocked the language of the gods. Informed by his discovery of the harmonic series within the divisions of a single string, which is an inaudible series of overtones that naturally subsists within the 4 months of each note, Pythagoras hypothesized how everything that moves vibrates and therefore will create sound. Furthermore, Pythagoras proposed that the planets and celestial bodies will not only vibrate to produce their own individual notes, but will interact with each other on a cosmic scale to create harmonies across the universe, music that can only be heard and perceived by the gods. When two vibrations join together in this way to become greater than the sum of their parts, this is referred to in modern vocabulary as heterodyning frequencies. Incidentally, the Pythagoreans also believed that science and religion were connected, that the earth was round, and that mathematics could explain the known physical world. Pythagoras' work with the mathematics of string vibrations and the natural harmonic series would be a foundation in the evolution of the Western musical system, tuning temperaments and pitch scales. Although the philosophical context has changed, his theory still rings true with the fundamentals of modern physics and acoustics. String theory posits how there exist very small strings of energy, whose various modes of vibration produce the particles and forces of nature, often described through analogies with music, and especially Pythagorean harmonies. Some scientists have even hypothesized that vibration may have been the cause of the Big Bang. I refer once again to "in the beginning was the Word." I could also refer to the fall of Jericho, Joshua 5:13. Vibration as a weapon. Pythagoras had discovered how rhythm and music is part of the fabric of nature, believing he had deciphered the language of the gods. But we are not immortal. Man has to shape the sound within a finite temporal space. We do not have an eternity through which to assimilate the acoustic songs emanating from the spheres. Nature generally avoids geometric pattern and equidistant symmetry, whilst man, especially within Western agriculture and industry, cultivates the earth into a myriad of such entities. In a similar way, man-made music needs some form of geometric pattern and temporal order so that the human senses can comprehend, internalize, recognize, remember, and engage with emotional reminiscences of that memory during and within the sonic journey. Composers sculpt patterns of heterodyning vibration within a finite temporal and acoustic space. It is fact that the Western classical tradition of music evolved out of the early liturgical plainsong of the Catholic Church. For centuries, plainsong and the contrapuntal polyphony, which is music of multiple parts and lines it produced, was retained and closely guarded by the Church for God and God alone, only to be heard by the elite public during liturgical service. The monarchs of Europe were believed to be elected by God. Therefore, it was eventually sanctioned for this music, this new music, to leave the church and monasteries for the state courts. As music filtered out of the church through the stately courts of Europe and eventually into more public forums during and following the Renaissance, Western art music was no longer considered the personal possession of the Christian God, but the connection between art, music, and faith, as the following quotations suggest, seems to have remained symbiotic. In these quotations, you hear a sense of subservience, of total subjection, and thanks, completely humble. A servant of Handel swings the door open to Handel's room. The startled composer, tears streaming down his face, turns to his servant and cries out, "I did think I did see all heaven before me and the great God himself." Handel had just finished writing the movement which would take its place in history as the Hallelujah chorus. A few days before Handel died, he expressed his desire that he would die on Good Friday in the hopes of meeting a good God, his sweet Lord and Saviour, on the day of his resurrection. He lived until the morning of Good Saturday, 1759. Johann Sebastian Bach, often referred to in his own lifetime as the Christian composer. Music's only purpose should be for the glory of God and the recreation of the human spirit. Bach is referring to the teachings of Martin Luther. Bach frequently initialed his blank manuscript pages with the marking, "Help me, Jesus," or "In the name of Jesus." At the manuscript end, Bach routinely initialed the letters SDG, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone the glory. To Bach, these were not trite religious slogans, but sincere expressions of personal devotion. Haydn. I prayed that an infinite God would surely have mercy on his finite creature, pardoning dust for being dust. These thoughts cheered me up. I experienced a sure joy, so confident that as I wished to express the words of prayer, I could not express my joy, but gave vent to my happy spirits and wrote above the Miserere Allegro. So he sped up his Miserere. Never was I so devout as when I composed the creation. I knelt down each day to pray to God to give me strength for my work. When I was working on the creation, I felt so impregnated with divine certainty that before sitting down to the piano, I would quietly and confidently pray to God to grant me the talent that was needed to praise him worthily. Like his music, Beethoven's relationship with God seems to have been a complex one. I have no friend. I must live by myself. I know, however, that God is nearer to me than others. I go without fear to him. I have constantly recognized and understood him. At the turn of the 19th century, the relationship between a Western classical tradition and spirituality remained strong. But this was now an era of the great composers, and an elevated sense of self-worth had slipped into the mindset of some, energized by the composer's elevation into public notoriety and release from the restrictive change which often accompanied patronage. Composers could now make an independent living from their craft, and sometimes even compose the music they wanted to compose. We hear a change in the tone. Brahms is more a part of this process. The other quote seems to be an instrument, just that the self isn't involved. Brahms seems very much involved in this interaction with God. The soul of man is not conscious of its powers until it is enlightened by spirit. The powers from which all truly great composers like Mozart, Schubert, Bach and Beethoven drew their inspirations is the same power that enabled Jesus to work his miracles. We call it God, omnipotence, divinity, the creator, etc. Schubert called it die Allmacht. But what's in the name, as Shakespeare so aptly questions? Straight away, the ideas flow in upon me directly from God. And not only do I see distinct themes in my mind's eye, but they are clothed in the right forms, harmonies and orchestration. Measure by measure, the finished product is revealed to me when I'm in those rare, inspired moods. When I compose, I always feel that I am appropriating that same spirit to which Jesus so often referred. Heading towards the turn of the 20th century, the world had vastly improved methods of communication and travel. The concept of a connected global village was on the immediate horizon. Many countries throughout Europe and the West were searching for their own national identities, and composers were rediscovering the cultural heritage of their own region. There was a surge in folk-inspired themes. What is the sound of Spain? What is the French style? As a composer, I have often been accused of sounding English, whatever that is. This search for a sense of national identity within a global community, coupled with a growing awareness and understanding of the world around us, clearly affected the individual's sense of self-identity and their place in relation to God. In the following quotes from Igor Stravinsky, we can hear the overtones of a new rationale, no longer in subservience or even in homage, but considered and respectful. The more one separates oneself from the canons of the Christian church, the further one distances oneself from the truth. Art is made of itself, and one cannot create upon a creation, even though we ourselves are graftings of Jesus Christ. Only God can create. I make music from music. With the rise of esoteric, atheistic futurism and modernism, Western art music went through a radical and quite public divorce from God in the first half of the 20th century. What could seem more outdated than spirituality and religion to the tradition-breaking modernists? Besides, there was simply no room for extra musical narrative or any other subversive influences outside of the absolute method of modernist technique and the relationships between the notes themselves. It is interesting to note, however, that Arnold Schoenberg, who invented the 12-tone technique, kicked off modernism, reconverted to Judaism after the Holocaust. Igor Stravinsky initially rejected his Orthodox upbringing, but renewed his vows later in life. And Olivier Messiaen, who was never really a modernist, but was influential within the movement, taught Boulez, the ultimate modernist, was a lifelong devout Catholic. Incidentally, and somewhat earlier, Claude Debussy was said to be a pagan sensualist, but that is another conversation. With every action comes a reaction, and the American musicians and composers of the 1960s, who perhaps had not been affected by the realities of a world war on their doorstep, like their European counterparts, reacted against the strict rules, abstract methods, and intellectualized absolute music of high modernism. Such tendencies can be observed as early as the 1960s, with Zen as an inspiration source for John Cage and his school, Indian philosophy for the minimalists. It is in the last few years, however, that the trend towards spirituality has become more concrete and more evident than ever. A new generation of composers, including John Tavener, Henryk Goretzky, and Arvo Pärt, put aside the intellectual legacy of minimalism and wrote music, the religious content of which can be compared only with music from the Middle Ages. Moreover, they enjoyed a commercial success unprecedented for contemporary classical music. What that quote refers to, Arvo Pärt, John Tavener, Henryk Goretzky are now referred to as the sacred minimalists. Arvo Pärt converted to Orthodox Christianity in '72. Tavener, English-born Tavener, converted to Russian Orthodox Christianity in '77, and Goretzky was a devout, lifelong Polish Catholic. Although the music of Arvo Pärt is perhaps the most popular and commercially successful, the 1992 recording of Symphony No. 3, Opus 36, by Henryk Goretzky, stayed at the top of the national classical charts for 8 months. With these quotes from Arvo Pärt, we see yet another change in the attitude. We now have a musical prayer, conversations with God. There is that sense of self. There is an I and there's a God, but there's a conversation. It's changed from Brahms, from Stravinsky. It's no longer in complete subservience, but this is much more of the faith. At the time when my music came into existence, I had my hands full just trying to solve my own problems. I had to put myself into a state of mind which would allow me to discover a musical language that I could live with. I was in search of a little island of sound, in search of a place in my innermost being where, shall we say, a dialogue with God might take place. Finding this place became a task of vital importance to me. And another quote, I could compare my music to white light, which contains all colours. Only a prism can divide the colours and make them appear. This prism could be the spirit of the listener. And of course, through all these changing attitudes towards religion and contemporary art in Western art music, religion seems to have stayed consistent. Across the board, they value contemporary art. Not so long ago, people believed in ideologies, systems, and institutions to save all societies. Today, they have given up such hopes and have returned to relying on the individual, on individual freedom, individual initiative, and individual creativity. His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. Next to the Word of God, the noble art of music is the greatest treasure in the world. Martin Luther, 1538. I found an additional quote to add to that. I truly desire that all Christians would love and regard the lovely gift of music, which is a precious, worthy, and costly treasure given to mankind by God. The riches of music are so excellent and so precious that words fail me whenever I attempt to discuss and describe them. And the Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, admired the Hindu tradition in which all artistic work is recognized as a form of yoga. In this way, he commented, there ceases to be any distinction between sacred and secular art. All art is yoga, and even the art of making a table or a bed or building a house proceeds from the craftsman's yoga and from a spiritual discipline of meditation. The sustained commercial success and public popularity of the music from the sacred minimalists, and in more recent years, Sir James Macmillan, has not been enough to convince some researchers that contemporary classical music in the 21st century has mended its rift from the spiritual. Many others have touched on the sense that music springs from faith and can only be artificially separated from it. This includes non-religious people who often speak of their experience of music in spiritually inflected terms, describing it as soulful or transcendent or mystical or whatever. This is where there really might be a paradox, secular people being moved by the sacred through music. British music departments and conservatoires in the 1970s saw music as complete in itself, and that anything else was extraneous and irrelevant. Today, and this was written in 2018, if you go to a concert, even of sacred music, you are unlikely to find reference in the program notes to religious inspiration. There remains a snooty condescension in intellectual circles towards the extra musical and a privileging of pure music analysis. When music encounters religion, I see the results as being like the scriptural image of water and wine. The art can be transformed and come not to serve theology, but to be theology, or more exactly, theo-artistry, insofar as it may reveal God in a new way through artistry. This concept of theo-artistry has been developed by George Corbett of the University of St Andrews. He's working with Sir James Macmillan, one of the leading composers. They're doing some wonderful work. It's worth checking out the project. The engagement and tensions between modernism and tradition and institutionalized religion and spirituality are inherent issues for many composers who have sought to invoke spirituality and otherness through contemporary music. And Sir James Macmillan says, it will be interesting to see if the next generation of composers will engage with theology, Christianity, or the general search for the sacred. There's been a significant development of this kind of intellectual, academic and creative activity in the last 20 years or so. In the world of theology, there is an understanding that the arts open a unique window on the divine. So I'm looking at the time. I think I still do have, before I get to the conclusion, I think I still do have a short span of time to refer to some of my concepts and my composition. Use these statements as a conduit into examining whether spirituality or any elements of spirituality, faith, religion exist in my music. The majority of the works in my portfolio are unified through consistent reference to a fundamental philosophy of working with ancients and natural resources. Initially a poetic musing, this philosophy found substance within theories of acoustics, natural resonance, vibration, the harmonic series, subharmonics, multiphonics, and heterodyning frequencies. This would lead to research into equidistant scales, where the octave is divided into equal steps, varying sizes. Initially equidistant pentatonic scales, and the utilization of the Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, and pi to inform and/or control pitch, silence, dynamics, duration, rhythm, texture, proportion, and form. Later research strands include natural causality, cause and effect, fractals, eternal cycles and eternal forms or platonic forms, symmetrical, proportional, and asymmetrical palindromes, chaos theory, and chaotic attractors. Fractals, and specifically the Mandelbrot and Julia sets, produce mathematic self-similar replication and a seemingly infinite evolution and magnification that can be compared to the self-similar replication found in natural growth cycles in nature. Fractals have been referred to as God's thumbprint. Most of my pieces include reference to elements of extra musical inspiration and preconceived method within their compositional foundations. The oral phenomenon of music can seem limitless to the composer, a vast ocean where without consistent navigation one can easily get lost. Method provides a way to plot a course through a composition, and external inspiration helps to decide upon a destination, a sense of place, personality, character, and identity. This in turn allows the composer to develop intricate readings of the music whilst retaining focus and controlled momentum towards the conclusion of the sonic journey. Whilst it is not believed that all music has to mean something, this composer has found it useful to employ extra musical stimuli for inspiration. Of course, music can be abstract and absolute, shaped entirely by musical choices, functional pitch, rhythm, and timbre. But external influences can help one to conceive a sense of musical character, a personality, a compositional intent. If one was to compare the planning of composition to that of an actor preparing for a challenging role, one would expect to know certain details in order to get into character. Name, time, place, dialogue, and context. Within this analogy, one can see a clear comparison to composing. In order to feel the music, to step into the sound world, one must get into character. I think I have just a couple of minutes, so I'll just skim through some of the notable points. So, the earliest piece I've listed, 2003-04, concentrates on Aztec folklore, mythology, spirituality. It's about the journey of the soul through the stages of the Mexican underworld, the afterlife. Deals with multiphonics, these vibrations are heterodyne, but as chords. So if you imagine multiple vibrations, heterodyne becomes so much more complex. Uber natural sounds, sounds like the sound of the soul. Natural resonance, again, reference to nature. Reductive textures, sense of minimalist, almost sacred minimalism in the textures. When a snake eats its own tail is a reference to African orature, spoken literature. This concept is also found in indigenous American themes. When a snake eats its own tail, it forms a circle representative of the continuous cycles of nature, change and renewal. I've used the Fibonacci sequence, causality, cause and effect, with chaos, the butterfly effect. An acoustic mandala for the 14th, this was major work. It was dedicated to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, has a little conduit of Tibet for Tibet, and I don't normally make political statements in music. And this is all built upon formal symmetries and asymmetries with multiplications of the number 14, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. 16 to 4 at the bottom. That was my first step into using liturgical text, Latin text. It was taken from the Psalms. Acousmatic chakras, using the sitar by existence is a spiritual instrument with its own culture. And in the performable version of that piece, electroacoustic chakras, I use Sanskrit text, Hindu and Buddhist phrases for the vocalist. At the bottom, a Kyrie, almost functional liturgical music with text from the Catholic Mass. I think I need to pretty much jump onto my... Le Poème Vierge, a simple monk and an American Lama, a piece I wrote quite recently. 3 songs for countertenor, baritone, piano, inspired by the 3 meetings between His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, aka a simple monk, and the Trappist monk and poet Thomas Merton, aka an American Lama. I was hoping when this gets performed that I might be able to put the character or the vocalist of Thomas Merton in a Newcastle top, and the vocalist for the Dalai Lama in a Burnley top, or maybe Aston Villa. And Manufactured Idols, a play, again a reference to spirituality simply in the title. And coming soon, settings of the poems of St. John of the Cross will be set in 3 songs and 3 poems as chants. I'm going to move on to my conclusion now. It takes me 5 minutes, I think. Oh, I did have a caveat. It seems my portfolio embraces the many concepts of spirituality. Whether I consider I'm composing for God or to God, I don't think that comes into my, I'm aware of God. I think that's where I'd recognize there's a power in the voice of composition. I think that's as far as I would go at this point. In reflection and conclusion, in the 21st century, many forms of sacred and spiritual music now exist outside of liturgical functionality. No longer sanctioned by the church for the church, but nonetheless composed with sincerity and respect. Some composers, like Arvo Pärt, feel they are speaking to God. Others, such as Brahms, have perhaps implied that God is speaking through them. Many composers have dedicated their music to the glory of God and accredited their talent to the existence of God. The 21st century composer has re-engaged with concepts of God and spirituality after a brief divorce from modernism, but religious expression and devotion exists in all forms of art. It is often mused how music is the purest form of art because it is free from the physical restrictions of space and object that apply to other creative disciplines. But is it? One must control the listening environment. Therefore, music is bound within the confines of the concert hall, amphitheatre, or auditorium. It requires amplification in more social settings, which comes with regulatory conditions on volume and noise pollution. Internet streaming is finite within the bounds of the loudspeaker or headphones. Is music the purest form of art because it is sculpting with an incorporeal, natural, and infinite that may have been the cause of the Big Bang? I refer to vibration, and once again, in the beginning was the word. Perhaps there is something to this one. It is fact that the Western classical tradition in music evolved directly out of the plain song of the Catholic Church, and this new music was proclaimed as the divine property of God. But whether this makes music the purest form of art, or any more divine than other creative disciplines, remains highly subjective. And so I choose to abstain from divisive suggestion of either acceptance or denial. It is true that music has always held and will always hold a hyper-real sense of mystique. Words, images, and objects can often be so definitive. Their meanings can be interpreted in many complex varieties, personalized to the receiver, but most will be able to agree on the definitive form of the literal text and see the same object or image. Ask 3 people in an audience of contemporary classical music for the description of the piece they've just heard, and they will probably give you comparisons to other pieces of music and describe sounds through metaphor and analogy. It is this intangibility that seems to elevate the mystique surrounding music. There is no real sense of object or artifact other than the score. The trained ear can recognize stylistic differences through the centuries, but the absence of an artifact means that the music is born almost anew as each performance. So music does not age in the same way. The quote on the screen by Sir James Macmillan, you can see Sir James does not quite sit on a fence like I did. And in conclusion, the 21st century composers may not be speaking in the language of the gods, or even in a colloquial, humanized perception of dialect, for mankind has much evolving to do before we could achieve that. But perhaps there is just enough supporting evidence within the fields of science, physics, mathematics, and acoustics to arrogantly propose that composers sculpt with inflections from the voice of nature. How one interprets the very existence of nature is entirely up to the individual. Thank you.